We're going to add and subtract decimals today, including positive and negative decimals. Okay, so our first example, negative 9.85 plus negative 12.3. We're adding, same signs, add and keep. So we're going to add them together, keep the sign. Since we're working with decimals, we have to remember the rules of adding and subtracting decimals. We're going to put these numbers one on top of the other, and we're going to line up the decimal points. So I'm going to put the negative 9.85 on top. Underneath it, I'm going to put the negative 12.3. Line up the decimal points. If you want to fill in that empty space below the 5, you can fill in with the 0. Okay. We already decided we're adding, so we're going to add the numbers because they're the same sign. So 5 plus 0, 8 plus 3, carry the 1, 12, carry the 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. That decimal point comes straight down. Same signs we added, and we keep the signs since they were both negative. Our final answer is negative 22.15. So the same rules that apply to integers apply to decimals, and when you do add or subtract decimals, you line up the decimal points. Second example, so now we're adding. We have a positive number plus a negative number. So the rule we learned for that is to actually subtract and then keep sign of higher number. So this is super important because when you go to subtract these, it doesn't matter which one's negative and which one's positive. We just want to find the difference between their absolute values. So whichever one's a bigger absolute value, which is the 23, we're going to put that one on top in order to subtract them. So I'm going to take that negative 23 and I'm just going to write it down as a 23 right now. And underneath it, I'm going to subtract 15.5. So I'm going to turn 23 into 23.0. You can see our decimal points are lined up. So different signs subtract. Just put the bigger number on top. It doesn't matter what order they're in the problem. We're going to deal with that in the answer. So we're going to go ahead and subtract. So I'm going to borrow. 10 minus 5 is 5. I have to borrow again. 12 minus 5 is 7. 1 minus 1 is 0. So the difference between the two is 7.5, but we still have to figure out the sign of the answer. So keep the sign of the higher number. So going back to the original problem, 23 has a bigger absolute value than 15.5. 23 is negative, so our answer is negative. So let's make sure that we have a negative 7.5 is our final answer. Next one. Now it's a subtraction problem. I'm going to add the opposite, which means I'm going to keep 7.3 the way it is. So I'm going to rewrite this problem as 7.3. Add instead of subtract. So this subtraction sign becomes a plus sign. The opposite means instead of a negative 10.68, it just becomes a positive 10.68. So 7.3 plus positive 10.68. Now I can line up the decimal points. They're both positive, so that's pretty easy. So I'm just going to say 10.68 plus 7.30, because I'm lining up my decimal points, and add. Final answer, 17.98. Okay, last one. So when I look at this one, I see just a good old subtraction problem, but I notice that the first number is smaller than the second number. Right away that tells me I'm going to get a negative answer. So you always, always, always want to put that bigger number on top when you go to subtract them. So you can think of this a couple different ways. You can leave it the way it is and just switch them around to subtract. I can turn this subtraction problem into an addition problem, which means add and then the opposite, which is negative 23.1. But like I said earlier, the bigger number, if you're going to subtract to get an answer, you need to put the bigger absolute value on top. So we need to set this up like this, 23.1 minus 18.9. And I'm subtracting because they do have different signs. 18.9 is positive. I'm adding a negative number to it. So subtract, keep the sign of the higher number. All right, so we're going to borrow. So I get 4.2. If I look back at this addition problem, I notice that the sign of the higher number is a negative, so my answer should be negative. That makes sense. If we go back to the original problem, we already said, well, we're taking a bigger number from a smaller number, so we should end up below 0 or negatives.